Good evening, I'm John Batchelor. This is the John Batchelor Show. My colleague and co-host and friend Francis Rose of Federal News Radio joins me as my co-host this evening. He is at WMAL in the nation's capital, my affiliate at WMAL. Francis, a very good evening to you. We've had mixed and heavy news these last days. I thank you for taking this audience on Friday night. The news then was the Cromnibus. And since then, of course, we've had the tragedy in Sydney, Australia, and we're going to go there in just a moment. But I want to begin with the news from Washington. Washington's funded through 2015, save for the important detail of Homeland Security. Is everyone acting with a spring in their step, doing their Christmas shopping? Good evening to you, Francis.
Good evening, John, and thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you from Washington. Yes, there's a big sigh of relief, I guess, that we heard over the weekend, and especially this morning as details started to come out about the Cromnibus, and we learn more about some of the things that are in it and how they'll affect the federal government and affect citizens through the rest of the fiscal year. But I have been surprised today by the almost euphoria that people are experiencing. The fact that Congress was actually able to do its job, John. They did what they were constitutionally required to do, and it's actually been the first time that they've gotten it done this early in quite a long time.
This is what it looks like. They funded the budget. That was it. No great issue of state. It's a matter of 12 budget bills, if I recall this correctly, from many years of reporting this, and I'm never quite sure what I'm saying. 12 budget bills for each department, and they funded 11 of them through 2015. So they're done. But there's one that's not. That's Homeland Security, and that was the CR part. How so, Francis?
Well, the reason they did that, John, was because without doing that, it was John Boehner's belief that he was not going to be able to get this deal done at all. There was a significant portion of his caucus that was outraged by the president's executive order on immigration, and so this became the relief valve by which the speaker said, we will deal with the Homeland Security Department and deal with the way that the president's executive orders funded when we come back and we have both chambers of Congress. The rest of it, we're going to work out a deal, and it will be ugly on all sides, and there will be something everybody hates in it. And the old saying in Washington is that if the people at each end of the spectrum hate it, it's probably a good deal, or probably at least will get done, and that's what happened. But that's the reason that Homeland Security is still out there, because the only way that the speaker could get this done was to give an entire Republican Congress the opportunity to take a very close look at this in the spring.
The House had closed its business for the year and went along home. Has the Senate closed its business as well, or has it got another day or so?
No, the Senate actually will be here throughout the week, John. They're considering nominations and actually killed one today. Not entirely dead, but dead at least for this Congress. The Social Security Administrator nominee, Carolyn Colvin, will not get a vote for the rest of this Congress, and that means when one is nominated for a cabinet position in a certain Congress or another political appointee position, and that nomination is not voted on in the Senate, then that nomination has to start over from scratch. Now, we don't know yet whether she'll do that or not, so we can't say that nomination is completely dead. One of my colleagues from Roll Call told me today that it is actually likely that nomination will come back in the 114th Congress, because the opposition to Ms. Colvin to take over as permanent administrator isn't so vehement that they don't think they can get it through a Republican Senate. But that nomination is dead for now. They're going to be voting on ambassadorial nominations and some other lower-level political appointee positions throughout the week, some judges and so on. I'm not aware of any of those at the present time that are controversial. They're pretty much all procedural. But this is a result of a deal that Senator McConnell and Senator Reid thought they had that was blown up by Senator Cruz. They were going to do the National Defense Authorization Act, the Omnibus, and be gone. There were some objections, some procedural things that are even a little bit over my head, but that's the reason why the Senate's still at it.
We go now to Sydney, Australia. Actually, we're going to Canberra, which is the capital of Australia. A longtime resident of Sydney, Australia, to help us. This is Fergus Hunter. Fergus is at the Sydney Morning Herald, which is a wonderful site for you all to follow in the tragedy, the events of these last hours. I was accidentally watching on my Twitter feed as I was writing when the first reports came to America, on Twitter is where I saw it, of something dire happening happening at the Lindt Chocolate Shop on Martin Place in central Sydney. This is the central business district of Sydney, right across the street from Channel 7, which is a prominent news channel in Sydney. And so they turned their cameras and they were right across the street with a wide angle shot. Fergus, a very good afternoon to you in Canberra. Thank you for this. 3 dead, including the shooter, and lots of tragedy in Sydney. What I'd like to know, because you've consumed the news, you're a news junkie like Francis and I, these last hours, how is Australia talking about this, given that the shooter was a clearly very disturbed man who had been out on a warrant, as I understand it? He'd been investigated for multiple serious infractions. He'd been given asylum back in the 20th century, in the mid-1990s. How is Australia regarding this action this afternoon? Good afternoon, Fergus.
Good afternoon, and hi, John. Thanks for having me. Look, it's been not only a challenging time for Australia, but particularly challenging for the media. I think it's not something that we've had to deal with very much in recent times. So it's been confronting. They've had to figure out how to cover this ethically and also from what angles to look at it. Yes, there are issues around. You know, he was given asylum, a self-proclaimed cleric, given asylum from Iran in the 90s, and since then has had an extensive criminal history. You know, he has almost 50 charges of indecent or sexual assault. He sent offensive letters to the families of dead soldiers who went to Afghanistan in 2007 to 2009. He was on bail for being an accessory to the murder of his ex-wife. So, you know, people are trying to get their heads around these issues, and questions are now being asked of the state government in New South Wales of how this man was allowed out on bail.
Francis?
Your colleague, Fergus, Ann Davies, has a piece up on your publication's website about an encounter that she had with this man. Do we have any sense that he's connected to anyone or any organization in Australia, or does he appear to be a lone wolf like some of those we've seen in the United States?
Well, yeah, that kind of information is now starting to come out, and I guess there are varying reports, but there was definitely that fear, and there's been that fear for a while that a lone wolf attack was coming. So the former head of the security and intelligence here in Australia said just before he retired recently that the thing that kept him up at night was the idea of a lone wolf attack, because they can't track them as well. And this man doesn't appear to have, had any co-conspirators, but that's not confirmed. So he very well could be a lone wolf attacker who is not representative of the vast majority of people.
You're from Sydney, Fergus, and so what I understand from watching the television obsessively for about 12 hours is that Martin Place is the center of shopping for Christmas presents, and this is a very swanky place, and the Lindt Cafe was a fine place to take chocolate. Apparently, Australians, like Americans, are compulsive chocolate consumers. Is that all correct?
Yeah, absolutely right. So Martin Place is smack bang in the centre of the central business district in Sydney, and it's a notable location for another reason. So there were reports earlier this year, a couple of months ago, when there were mass raids and arrests, that there was a plan by others, not this man, by others, to basically pull an innocent bystander off the street, drape them in an IS flag, and behead them and upload the video. So that it's notable for that reason as well. It's incredibly busy, lots of shoppers at this time of year, obviously a lot of people going to work, having coffees, and yes, right across the way from Channel 7, one of the biggest news stations in Australia.
One more question, Francis.
Prime Minister Tony Abbott says there are lessons to be learnt from this incident, Fergus. Do we have a sense of what they are and what he intends to focus on?
Well, I don't know exactly. No, I mean, there's definitely always lessons to be learnt from the way a siege unfolded itself. The police have been widely praised for the way they dealt with it, but I guess this experience will inform how they act in future. I think there are important lessons to be learned in other areas, such as, one of the great things we've seen emerge is this social media hashtag I'll ride with you, which is basically a sign that we won't, basically consign a whole religion and a whole bunch of people to discrimination based on the acts of one very, very troubled individual. So there's a lesson there about uniting in the face of these hateful attempts to divide. But yeah, I guess that everyone is going to have to try and unite. Yeah, that's the main message, I guess.
Fergus Hunter is the Sydney Morning Herald. He's in Canberra, which is the capital of Australia, at Parliament House. That's the Washington, that's the Capitol Hill, that's the White House, that's everything together. The events took place in Sydney, Australia, on a place called Martin Place. You'll see much video of it these next days, and we'll learn more about the perpetrator. Two are dead. The 38-year-old woman and a 34-year-old man, two of the hostages died as the others were freed. Francis Rose of Federal News Radio, I'm John Batchelor.